You're not a real podcaster until you forget to hit the record button.
It's actually kind of funny because some of my best content I've ever filmed, I probably could not put it online, but literally as you're talking before the podcast even starts, I mean, literally it's the best stuff you've ever done.
All right.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely let's get started. Let's get started. First up, everybody, it's your boy Chris. It's another amazing episode of Financipation where we teach people how to make money, how to save money, how to invest money, how to build generational wealth. In this channel, everybody, I look forward to teaching everybody essentially more or less how to take themselves hopefully out of corporate America, and more importantly, just kind of build a life that I would say revolves around family, around friends, and around purpose. So a couple of months ago, I think I was telling you guys about it. I was at FinCon 2024, and I've always been taught that when you see greatness, you need to go out of your way to go talk to it. And as I was sitting at this bar, pretty much kind of going through my notes and kind of figuring out what FinCon was, because this was literally my first time ever going to this financial conference in Atlanta, I was sitting next to this gentleman right here, everybody. And what was crazy was I saw about 50 people literally stop by and say, Doug, 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 Doug. And I was like, hey, who is this guy? I saw people wearing their BDUs. I saw guys, civilians. I saw military contractors. I saw people like myself, basically content creators. I saw authors. I saw engineers. I saw lawyers. I saw doctors. Literally, I saw about 50 people sit next to basically stop and start talking to Doug. And I'm sitting there just having a drink saying, who is this guy? So it was pretty cool. And I was always taught essentially that once you see greatness, you go out of your way to essentially find out who it is. So with that, Doug, let's go ahead and get started, because as I got to know you more and more just from talking to you at FinCon, I was like, hey, this is the kind of gentleman a lot more people in my audience need to kind of figure out how he positioned his life as far as what he's doing in his life when he was in his 20s, his 30s, and his 40s. And most importantly, the kind of lifestyle that you're having now as a retired, happily married man. So let's get started. Let's get started.
All right, Chris. Well, thanks. It's good to be here. And I really enjoyed FinCon. And those are friends that I've built up over the last 12 FinCon. So I kind of preloaded that.
10-4. All right. I always like to have people start pretty much at the beginning, I would say, Doug. So I guess my first question to you is this. Introduce yourself. I know you obviously, but introduce yourself to my audience. Who are you, Doug?
I'm a retired submariner, U.S. Navy. I joined the Navy 17 years old and did 20 years on active duty and retired in 2002, a little over 22 years ago, at the age of 41. My spouse and I reached financial independence on active duty in late 90s. And before I retired, we did our numbers again. And sure enough, we had met the constraints of the 4% safe withdrawal rate. So we retired, which was pretty unusual back then. I joke that back in the 1990s and early 2000s, when you reached financial independence, most of the techniques were clay tablets, wooden styluses, and an abacus. And since then, we've enjoyed the last 22 years. I discovered that I enjoy writing, and I started posting to internet forums, mostly about personal finance and some financial independence. And as that grew, we got bigger and bigger to the point where we eventually wrote the military guide to financial independence. And that happened with the assistance of about 50, 60 other veterans on an internet forum. We crowdsourced that manuscript. I took it through the editing and publishing process, and everybody that contributed something to get that book published got a vote on where we gave the royalties to military-friendly charities. And 15 years later, we're still giving money to charity. We've accomplished $30,000 to Fisher House Foundation and Wounded Warrior Project over the years. And as we kept on going with our lives, we raised our daughter, launched her successfully from the nest. She joined the Navy on her own and got her own look at that glamorous lifestyle. Let's just say she's learned a lot as well, and she's seen enough. We also now are grandparents. Our granddaughter turns 5 years old in January, and when we started our family in the 1990s on active duty, we didn't realize how it was going to realign all of our priorities and just turn around our world. And it happened all over again when our daughter and son-in-law started their family. And I was a little surprised, but I'm just as happy now to have another child to kind of raise. You know, we're sitting there, we're spending maybe an hour a day with her every day of the week, maybe some extra time on Sunday night. But it's having that grandparent presence in their lives that really makes me happy to contribute my time and my effort. And I think I got all the glitter off of my eyeshadow that she put on me the other day. Since then, 22 years, I've kept writing. My daughter and I wrote another book in 2018 about raising money savvy families because people were asking, how do you raise kids for financial independence? And I was happy to get that question because that meant that all the grown-ups have seen everything on the internet about how to reach financial independence already. And they're just dealing with the next generation problem because they already have it all figured out. My spouse and I still travel as much as we can, whenever we can. We joke about slow travel while you still can. Do not save that for old age. I still start every morning with a surf forecast. I still paddle out 2, 3 times a week. Today was pretty mellow, but the North Shore is coming up for big surf this week, and it'll be fun to see what goes on there. I plan to keep going with some combination of surfing, slow travel, and writing and grandparenting pretty much for the rest of my life. We've got things dialed in just the way we want.
Got you. Nice, nice. Doug, that was beautiful why you said that because I meet so many people, and it's really sad to say this. I meet so many people that have told me they're scared to retire. Most of them say it because they ain't got the money to retire. I'll just cut right to the chase. That's what most people say. But then I meet that very strange group that says, Chris, if I retire, I'm gonna die. I'm like, dude, there's literally a world out there outside of corporate America, outside your business. I mean, like you said, you're surfing and stuff like that. You travel to a different country probably a couple times every year. There's so many. I mean, you can learn other languages, you can explore other cultures. There's so much stuff to do out there, and it's really sad to me when I meet people who say they can't retire because they're too broke to retire. And then it's just as sad when I meet people say that they don't want to retire because they have no hobbies, no friends, no family members, and
Yep.
work is all that they have. And it's very sad to me when I hear that kind of stuff. It's horrible, actually. It's funny, Doug, that you mentioned U.S. military. First of all, thank you for your service. My parents actually met in the U.S. military. My mother did 23 years. She was a drill sergeant. My father was 22 years resources. My dad, I believe, retired in 96. My mother in 99. So I am a military kid, and my parents were U.S. Army. So no hate to the Navy. They were Army. It's one of those kind of things where I would just say before I ask you the other questions, being in the military, what are three of the coolest lessons I would say just being in the military from a military perspective and a 20-year military guy? What are some benefits that you got from that? What are three life lessons that you learned from it, I would say?
Well, I'm in my 60s now, and I'm still apologizing to all the drill sergeants I ever encountered while I was on active duty. And I don't mind apologizing to your father as well for what he did. But the military, when I joined the Navy, 17 years old, I already knew everything, right? And that gave me the structure and discipline that I so desperately needed at that age and did not appreciate at all, but in the long run has paid off tremendous dividends. I think the biggest things I learned from the military was when to step up and take the initiative, how to take care of your troops, how to take care of people, how to keep paying that forward. And it was just joining something bigger than me and finding out that I could contribute and do more things than I ever thought possible. You don't learn that very easily by going through a normal life with a normal college and a normal corporate career. Some people find it, others never do, but everyone in the military is exposed to it.
Got you. If you had joined the military at I'm sorry, if you went to college at 17, how different would Doug's life be today?
Much different. Well, at first I would have been, a third or fourth college by now, and this time I really mean I was going to graduate.
Yeah, it's funny. Let me ask you this. Do you believe that every American male, I'll say female as well, should have to serve in the military, have to serve some kind of service? Do you think every American that graduates of high school should at 18 be in the Marines, Army, Space Force, Navy, or Air Force? Do you think that would be a good idea? What's your take on that? So I've heard that floating.
I get that question a lot, and it sounds like a good idea. The drawback with it is that you bring in a whole bunch of conscripts, and most of them are not really happy to be there. So right away, you're trying to teach to people who really aren't ready to listen, which is another lesson in personal finance and financial independence. And they're gone in 2 or 3 or whatever years the commitment is. So I don't see a real workable military built on conscription. However, the all-volunteer force, I think, is quite likely to bring in people that will start out for 6 years as a try-it, maybe only 4 years. And of the people that stick around, then you have dedicated, motivated, well-trained, legacy, corporate memory kind of training, and also operational experience. And I think that pays off far more to have a smaller all-volunteer force than it does to have the world's biggest bunch of conscripts Now, I'm saying that because I've watched what we went through after the draft ended in the 70s and we're in the post-Vietnam phase. It was kind of grim going through that area, but when we have figured out the all volunteer force, it's gotten better. And you notice probably that one of the reasons that there are so many options in the military today for women, not just because they're smarter and better behaved and more mature as military service members, but also because we were leaving out at least half of the available population of people who could join the military and make a career out of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, my mother joined the military for that exact reason. She wanted to get out of the one stoplight city that she lived in. Joined the military, made it a career. Thankfully, she met my father, and the rest was history. So, yeah, I find just I did not personally serve. I have a whole bunch of stories about walking into military recruitment stations. I actually met David Goggins that way,
Oh, wow.
becoming famous. But it's interesting because even though I did not serve in the military, 90% of the people I meet, they always ask, were you former military? They say, you seem like a military guy. I think it's because I grew up, like my mother was a drill sergeant, my father, 20-year veteran. And the discipline they taught me as far as like finances, working out, taking care of your body, looking guys in the eye, seeing past race, realizing we're all black, our blood is red, being open to other cultures and stuff like that. A lot of that rubbed off on me from being around military people, and it's really interesting because I've always generally gotten along very well with military guys and military women. I think because of just my upbringing and stuff like that.
You're absolutely right. And in our family, our daughter calls that Navy or normal because she didn't recognize what normal was until she started college. And even then, she was hesitant.
Got you, got you. One thing, Doug, that you mentioned that's interesting too about your background, like a lot of people who are financially independent or who retire early today. When I was going through grad school, and I graduated in 2012, so I mean, I got my engineering degree undergrad, grad school, master's degree, MBA in finance, things like that. So
Okay.
I graduated relatively recently, 2012. And even back then, there was nothing like there is today about financial independence. And just as far as like building your own businesses, building your personal brand, building a business on the side, that just was not the case. It was work 30 years, work 40 years for your life, retire on 40% of what you couldn't live off of to begin with. That was the whole concept. But back in the 90s, man, that was like the Stone Age. So how did you and your wife get on that whole financial independence? I mean, how did you get on that? Because back then, yeah, that was very early.
It all started in 1992, 1993 with a book called Your Money or Your Life. And there was a chart in one page of that book where it showed you building your wealth and your dividends and your income from sources other than employment. And at some point, that line crossed over your expenses. And that's when you knew you were financially independent. And that chart made a tremendous difference to me and many others. And that was also the same time that we'd started our family. So it had new relevance. I wanted to spend more time watching my baby daughter grow up. And then a few years later, again, this sounds all like a history lesson, mostly because it is, but when Your Money or Your Life showed up, it was at the library in the hot picks table where all the brand new books came in that you could only borrow for a week and you had to read fast. A couple of years later, The Millionaire Next Door showed up. And again, that was very powerful. And it was interesting reading not just Stanley's stories of the millionaires, but also how he got his perceptions readjusted the more he got to know what goes into making a true millionaire. And we read all of the following books that Stanley put out in the Millionaire Next Door series. But those two started me researching what was out there. And again, this is back when you were still dialing into the brand new World Wide Web browsers. But as I looked through the library, magazines, and other places, and some online, we started to find research in obscure financial journals. And that's where I found the 4% Safe Withdrawal Rate by Bill Bengen. That was published in 94. Some people still remember the 1998 Trinity study. That was 3 university professors who figured out the 4% safe withdrawal rate really does seem to work. And so from those sketchy foundations, when we got to the point of financial independence in the late 90s, we decided to keep me on active duty until I retired. At that point in my life, your parents have probably shared this with you, but at that point in my life, it did not suck. I was, 2.5 years away. The first 18 years have been rough, but I was closer to retirement than I was ever before. And it really, training command, pretty much controlling my time and my routine. So I stuck it out and got that pension. And then we've been spending from our assets at the 4% safe withdrawal rate in addition to the expenses covered by my pension. So we've been working the 4% safe withdrawal rate for the last 2 decades, and I'm here to tell you it works just fine. All those resources got more and more, I'd say, popular, marketed, much more widespread as the years went by. And so I've been able to go back and look at the research, and every time it's upgraded, like, for example, the Trinity study update in 2009. And since then, it's just become more and more understandable, more and more relatable to people as we all have looked at it. I mean, 30 years have gone by since the original 4% safe withdrawal rate research. I've read that article several times and dug into all the details, and now it's starting to all come around again, right? You're starting to see Bill Bengen coming out in retirement or in his part-time work era, where he's talking about what he's learned over the years and things he's done with his research since then on the 4% safe withdrawal rate.
Do me a favor, Doug. I know what the 4% rule is. Obviously, I'm a financial consultant and I basically teach this stuff for a living. But to my listeners, explain the 4% rule in Doug Noordman's terms, and why is that so cool? Because the lifestyle that you're living right now, as far as being able to surf every day, seeing your beautiful daughter, seeing your kids, daughter going to Bangkok, going to Thailand, you can do that and not care about money. So explain to my audience, what is the 4% rule?
It started with a computer simulation that left out a lot of parts of life. And that computer simulation looked at the worst case in the last century of stock market and bond market returns. And it said, well, you can probably start out your financial independence at spending 4%, that first year of financial independence, spend 4% of your assets. And then every year after that, you get to take that, what you started with that first year, and raise it by the consumer price index. So every year you're doing 4% plus the inflation from the previous year. The research showed that that lasts for at least 30 years. And then at that point, humanity being what we are, everybody can look at a success rate and say, well, yeah, but is there any failure? Because we're all human. And we all looked at that and said, oh my gosh, this only works 97% of the time. What about that other 3% when it fails? And everybody went into a whole bunch of math and analysis and other research to try to figure out how to drive the 4% safe withdrawal rate to, 101.2%. But the lesson is that with the study back then done in the early 90s and the research that showed that that was the worst case, now we're finding out that people don't really just stop working and never earn another dollar, right? We all go find something we enjoy doing, and sometimes we earn a little money at it in our retirement. Also, there's Social Security. If you reach financial independence in your 30s and you start a 30-year drawdown at the 4% safe withdrawal rate, even if you do it like a robot and pay no attention to the markets and you end up having one of those very rare failures, you still have Social Security at the end of that. Social Security was not part of the original research, but it'll be there for us when we all get to our 60s, or however in our 60s we decide to start it. The other techniques that have been applied since then, and the other research that has shown stuff since then, and even Bill Bengen has come out today and admitted that the 4% safe withdrawal rate actually might be more like a 5% safe withdrawal rate. So what I tell people now is, when you're saving for financial independence, the inverse of 4% is 25. And so I tell people, when you're working, when you're saving for financial independence, this is something you should do just to have more resilience in your life. If you get laid off, if you have other things you want to do. When you get to that 25 times annual spending of your assets, then that means you can stop working and live your life the way you want to live it. I mean, keep working if you're feeling challenged and fulfilled and you enjoy what work is doing for you. But you can leave whenever you want and go find other things you want to do and pursue those other interests without having to worry about earning another dollar, without having to worry about making that money last for the rest of your life. And ever since then, I've been spending my time, even with millionaires, trying to get everybody comfortable with the emotions behind that 4% safe withdrawal rate, and trying to understand that, yes, you do have $5 million, and yes, that money really will last you for the rest of your life because you're spending less than 4% of it per year. Today, financial researchers and financial advisors are finding out that retirees, people who aren't working anymore, have no traditional employment income, they're actually spending more, like 3%. And in addition, our spending in financial independence tends to decline every year. And it's because we dial in our lifestyle and spend our money that's important to us. When we're spending less than that 4%, that means that your investments are still growing, and they're probably growing faster than inflation. And so your actual spending every year is dropping because your investments are exceeding inflation while you're spending it less than inflation. So that's why Bill Bengen said, 25 times your annual expenses, that's financial independence from 30 years of research and analysis. but maybe the real number is closer to 20 times your annual spending. And so I'm waiting for people that say, well, I've got 20, 20.1, 21, 22. Am I good to go? And the answer is, oh, yeah, probably are. Figure out your lifestyle, pay attention to your spending, maybe change your spending a little bit as you grow older and dial in your lifestyle or earn a little money. But
Absolutely.
the bottom line here is once we set aside the math and the logic and the finances, if you reached financial independence and continue to work, challenged and fulfilled, fine. But if you're working out of fear or ignorance about how this works, that means you are trading life energy that you might not have. You don't know how much life energy you have left, and you're trading that for money that you definitely do not need.
Nice, nice. Because I am a mechanical engineer and I have an MBA and I live in a world full of numbers. Let's put some numbers to this, Doug. Let's say a guy makes, say a woman makes $100,000 a year, and 25 times that would be $2.5 million. So she does her budget. She says, okay, I have to, I spend $100,000 a year just in this example. So as a result, she has to make 25 times her income. She has to save 25 times her income. So that would be $2.5 million in the bank, just to keep the math easy. And that would mean that if she withdrew 4% every year, which basically would be $100,000 a year, if she lived in retirement for 25 years, only spending $100,000 a year, she could literally live in perpetuity as long as her investments were making above 4%, correct?
That's not just investments making above 4%. That's her spending $100,000 a year in today's dollars, rising with inflation. So it's today's dollars and forever's dollars if you look at inflation. And also, there are some failure rates to the 4% safe withdrawal rate, but they're very rare. And so 80% of the time, she's going to have more money than she needs from that $2.5 million start. 10% of the time, she's going to have a lot more money. And by that, I mean, in today's dollars, double or even triple the $2.5 million she started out with. So again, 4% safe withdrawal rate is the worst case, the most apocalyptic scenario that researchers could come up with. And there's plenty of things that you can do if you see that coming. You'll see it coming from years away. In a recent podcast, Bill Bengen actually finally thinks he's cracked the code on some of the causes of the failures of the 4% safe withdrawal rate. And his number one cause is 6 or 7 years of high inflation. Not just one spike like we had in 2022, but 6 or 7 years of consistently high, above 6% per year for 6 or 7 years, a lot like the 70s, the late 70s when inflation went into double digits briefly in the 80s. That's what he knows today is one of the failure rates of the 4% safe withdrawal rate. And so if that's the worst case, that means that you can go through 2 or 3 of this 6 or 7 years of high inflation and probably still figure out what to do to cut your spending or to earn a little money or to change the way you invest. Maybe change your expenses by moving to a different country or traveling to a lower cost of living area in this country or however you want to do it. Plenty of solutions. And again, if all else fails, there's Social Security for those who qualify. And that cannot be ignored or discounted. You got to pay attention to that safety net of Social Security. You've worked for it. You already paid the money for it. You might as well use that to keep you from working too long.
Got you. People, if you're listening right now, literally, we just gave you guys a cheat code. I mean, about like what number you need to hit as far as how to live a life like Doug is living, where he spends all his time with his wife, so all the time with his granddaughter. He surfs every morning. He travels the world. Just came back from Thailand. This is the kind of stuff that I don't know, maybe just because I'm an analytical dude, but I've always kind of said, okay, there's a target, I'm going to shoot for it. And we literally are just teaching everyone who's listening to this podcast right now about how to retire with dignity and respect, and most importantly, how to thoroughly enjoy your life once you retire.
Yep.
I spent $125,000 for my MBA, and it was worth it because it taught me a lot about money that I just did not know. But I will say this, stuff like the 4% rule for some strange reason was not taught in grad school, and I don't understand why that is. I was taught how to calculate the derivatives of money. I was taught essentially how to build startups. I was taught a lot of really good stuff, but stuff like the 4% rule, how to retire early, that was not taught. I learned that pretty much once I started doing financial consultations and people started asking me the question, Chris, how much money do I need to retire? But now that I know for a fact, basically, okay, this is what I need to shoot for, my 2-year-old and my 8-month-old son, I'm going to be teaching them all this stuff probably when they're 7 or 8 years old, and maybe even before then. So this is how you pretty much change everybody your financial tree. Listening to individuals like Doug, who learned this back in the 90s, he's giving it to his daughter and to his granddaughter, and also be one day probably to his great grandkids. And I'm giving it to my kids.
I
And
hope
that's
so.
how you change your generational tree, because this knowledge, everybody, is powerful. I wish I knew about the 4% rule 20 years ago when I first started in corporate America. So it's one of those things. It's one of those things.
I'll caveat all of that to say that the person that's learning their financial independence, their financial literacy, you have to be ready. And when I was 17 years old, even when I was 24 years old, I was not ready to listen yet. If future me had gone back then to explain financial literacy, financial independence, even the 4% safe withdrawal rate, young me would have immediately ignored any of that and maybe called for security and had me escorted off the premises while I open up another beer. So it's readiness. And there's actually some Facebook groups for people who come to financial independence later in life. I don't mean too late. I mean later in your late 30s, 40s, even early 50s. It's not how old you are, it's when you start and how smart you are about it. And so if you even start with a net worth of zero in your late 30s, you're probably still going to reach financial independence in your 50s. That's the key is doing the readiness to learn and doing the work it takes. It's straightforward. It's just not easy to continue and to persevere.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is so true. That is so true, Doug. Let's keep it moving. Let's keep it moving. One aspect of your businesses, Doug, is that you teach and you coach military veterans how to become essentially financially independent and how to build generational wealth, if you will. What are three pieces, Doug? You kind of mentioned a few. What are three pieces of financial coaching you would give any military vet and any civilian right now on this podcast?
Well, somebody who discovers financial independence for the first time, right? They're pretty sure that life sucks the way it is right now for them. They want to start earning more money or saving more money and building their wealth. The very first step I talk about is track your expenses. And you've heard this everywhere on the internet by now, probably track your expenses. But the whole point is that you're finding out where the money goes. And there's no judging, there's no deprivation. This is not like a New Year's resolution where you're going to go to the gym and work out for 2 hours a day and live on 1,000 calories a day to lose 40 pounds before Valentine's Day. We want something sustainable. So you track your expenses for 3 or 4 months, whatever works for you, pen and paper, a phone, an app, whatever. At the end of that time, now you can sit down with that data and look at 3 or 4 months of expenses and figure out where the money's going. And it's not always pleasant to review that. And the second step is to cut out the waste once you've reviewed where your money's going. I'm not able to tell you what waste is. The waste is up to you. If you've been tracking your expenses and you're looking back at where you spent your money, you're going to find some things that were more valuable to you than other things. So do less of those other things. That point lets you cut out the waste, being a more efficient, more thoughtful, more mindful spender. And as you do that, you'll start to see your checking account balance grow because you're not wasting that money on things that you didn't care about much in the first place. This is the sustainable part of being frugal. It's challenging and fulfilling, and it feels like winning because you're building wealth and you're buying your financial independence. So once you've done that, the third step is to take that extra money in your checking account and start investing it. And you'll start off with your 401k or your thrift savings plan, making sure you get at least a match there. So with your IRAs, yours and your spouses, and in the military, I talk with junior people in their teens and 20s, and I say, do it all with the Roth thrift savings plan, do it all in the Roth IRA, right? Your lowest income tax bracket of your life right now. And continue on. As you raise your savings rate, you'll eventually maximize contributions to both of those accounts, and you can keep on saving more in a taxable brokerage account. All of that is passively managed index funds with low expense ratios. Pick an asset allocation. There's a lot of good asset allocations out there. Pick one that you can live with, that you can sleep at night comfortably and not worry about volatility. It all starts to snowball from there. And I will tell people as we get into this, once they get on board and start doing this, as you're saving for financial independence, your wealth starts to grow linearly, and it feels like you're never going to get there. And that's the boring middle, right? Exactly. The boring middle is the part where it's working. And then when it turns that corner and goes hyperbolic from exponential compounding, that's where you are going to have your financial independence sustainable for life. I know people feel like it takes forever to get to 10 times annual expenses, 15 times, 20 times. And getting from 24 to 25 times annual expenses, that seems to take longer than the entire rest of the process because you're so close to the goal line. Once you get there, the 4% safe withdrawal rate will help you get through all the volatility, all the worst case stuff. You'll just relax into your spending and your new lifestyle. You have to retire to something, not just run away from your career. And oh, the other thing is you still have to be responsible for your own entertainment, and you still have to manage your own time. Those are skills that are difficult to build, but now you have time in your life to figure out what you want to do all day. And that's how the most successful, happiest people that reach financial independence live their lives. They dial in their lifestyle from the things they find enjoyable. Challenging, fulfilling doesn't necessarily mean you have to earn $150,000 a year. And you get better at managing your time, because as a financially independent person, you realize that the most valuable resource you have for the rest of your life is your time.
Absolutely. 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 So true, Doug. I agree with literally everything that you said. I was doing a financial consultation the other day with a young lady, and more or less the answer you gave, that's pretty much exactly what I told her. I am curious. Index funds. I am a huge index fund guy. To my audience, why do you like index funds? I know I love them. Why do you like index funds so much? Total stock market, low cost index funds.
Well, we started investing in the 80s and 90s. And back then, thought the only resource was something like the Value Line book. I don't know if you've ever seen those archived in the back of a library somewhere, but Value Line used to publish hard copy books that you could read about companies and decide if you wanted to buy their stock. Business Week magazine used to publish an annual mutual fund issue.
I remember
My father
that.
told me, yeah, okay.
I
My
remember
father
that.
told me that he used to look at that annual issue and buy the mutual funds that had 2 out of 3 up arrows. That was how you picked your asset allocation back then. We paid sales charges of 2 to 3%. We paid expense ratios of 1.5%, and we kept that up for nearly 20 years. I know it hurts me now today to talk about all the money that got left on the table.
Heartburn.
Well, I helped Fidelity get rich. But the whole point is that if you are saving for your financial independence and you have a high savings rate, that it will happen faster if you minimize the expenses in your funds. And we managed to do it in less than 20 years, despite all those mistakes in the 80s and 90s, chasing the active manager, the hot fund, and all the other money we wasted back then by not understanding how to do this the way Vanguard did it. The index funds will have a low expense ratio, so that puts more of your money to work for you. The diversification is pretty much built in. I'm not going to say that a total stock market index fund is very diversified, but you can add other index funds around that and get the kind of diversification that you can live comfortably with, sleep at night, whatever your asset allocation is. I mean, there's probably 150 good asset allocations, and none of them are perfect, but they all are good enough to get started right now. And the lower your expense ratios are, the faster you build wealth, and the less you feel like you have to watch your investments. That's the hard part in the boring middle, right? Where you're watching your wealth. Hypothetically, it's growing, but it's hard to tell. It's like watching corn grow in the Midwest in August. Eventually, though, you'll have that work for you, and you'll have an asset allocation you're comfortable with, and you put things in autopilot. That's the most important part, especially for the military. Once you get those contributions to your accounts into autopilot, then if you have weekend duty or you get underway suddenly and you're gone or in the field for 3 or 4 weeks, or deployment, right? Who logs in from a combat zone to look at their investments and manage their money? Not me. So those autopilot mechanisms are what build those habits that get you to financial independence.
And the coolest thing about it too, once you automate your savings, you literally don't even realize the money's not there anymore. When you say, okay, $250 every time I get paid every 2 weeks, or every time I sell a certain percentage of my e-product, I'm gonna put 15% into my brokerage account or my SEP IRA or whatever. You
Exactly.
literally don't even notice that money's not there. It's kind of weird. It's like it hurts you to originally do it, but after the first or second time it's taken out of your account, you don't even notice that you're investing into your respective retirement accounts, and it's very, very cool. So, yep. I just got a question, Doug. Somebody asked, what's life like on a submarine, and what are the 3 coolest countries you've ever traveled to?
The life on a submarine, we joke that we had to pass a psychological screening to join the submarine force, and we never knew whether we passed that screening or whether we failed that screening, but we ended up on a submarine. So you take your cynical answer. I found it very cool because my father had worked in the nuclear power field with Westinghouse Electric. He had been an electrical engineer, and he got into the nuclear side of building civilian power plants. So I knew a lot about nuclear power as I was growing up, and it seemed like an irresistible challenge. Of course, that's only about 40% of the crew is the nuclear trained personnel. The rest of it is people who are conventionally trained in their experienced areas, a bunch of different fields. And that means you're doing more than just providing power and light and propulsion. You're doing other things with sensors and searching. And I found it was very challenging to take a submarine mission out there and go somewhere and do the exercises we needed to do, or do the things that we can't talk about in the submarine force. We did not discuss those operations. But again, I found it was challenging and interesting. And frankly, there's an aspect of going out there and finding things in the ocean and figuring out what they are and following them around to learn more about them that I always enjoyed doing as a submariner, and would, I still miss it a little bit today. Not enough to go back to sea and stand mid watches and weekend duty, but I still do miss that a little bit. So again, you've got a tremendously fascinating career field that is challenging to get into, and you keep learning stuff. You learn tremendous grace under stress and pressure. And you can run training all you want in a realistic environment, and it gets to the point where it's frustrating just to do the training. But when that casualty happens, that's when you realize that you've been training so long for it that when it does happen, all your instincts kick in and autopilot. You get through those immediate actions, you put things into a safer condition, and then you probably have a pretty good idea what you need to do to recover from that. I can't imagine the number of parallels there are between that grace under pressure on a submarine and being in a corporate environment. A lot of submariners end up going into first responder duties after they retire just because of that, because they know how to respond in stressful situations. Frankly, maybe we're chasing a little adrenaline, but you're also taking care of people. And that's another thing. Everybody in a submarine crew has to work together. If one person makes a mistake, ignorance or deceit or malevolence, if that one person makes a mistake somewhere, it can basically sink the whole submarine. And so you learn incredible teamwork. Again, it's very valuable outside of the submarine force. We joke about how submariners are some of the smartest people we ever know. Sometimes the joke is it's like a Mensa meeting, but it's held in a biker bar. But we all have learned to respect each other's skills, and we learn how to work together. And more importantly, we really trust each other with our lives, literally. So those are the things that I learned from my 20 years of active duty in the submarine force. Some trauma, right? There's some things you did that you had to recover from and you don't enjoy thinking about, but the benefits far outweigh the detractions.
Absolutely, absolutely. Quick submarine story. So when I went to undergrad from 2003 to 2007, got my mechanical engineering degree,
Okay.
and they were hiring pretty much anything that breathed with an engineering degree during 2000. That was basically during the height of Operation Enduring Freedom in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I actually had a job offer from the U.S. Navy. They were like, okay, based off your background, we'll hire you. And at that point in my life, the salary they were offering me was insane, considering I had literally no experience. And I didn't join because I couldn't, the idea of like living on a submarine for like 6 to 9 months, I was like, nah, I'm good. But
I completely understand.
I was like, nah, at 18, no, I mean, 22, nah, I was like, no way, 22, 23, nah, no way. But yeah, it's phenomenal. Everybody, anytime I meet a guy who did live on a, like you said, who was on a submarine, that generally speaking, I guess I come from an engineering background, they're very typically extremely smart. It's also funny you say that about the combat situation. I never was in, I guess, gunfire in combat, but I did box and I kickboxed semi-professionally, Thailand, stuff like that. Well,
Right, right.
Amsterdam, Singapore are literally all over the world. And like you said, you get to a point where you train so hard, you train so much that when you get in the ring, it's literally like it's like kind of it's deeper than training, but you train so hard you literally can't do it the wrong way. And I'm assuming if you're in a military environment, it's the same way. You train so hard that when combat does actually come, you're so prepared for it. It's still scary, still terrifying. You still know you might not be the same, but you know you're prepared for it. And that is somewhat of a comforting feeling. At least it was every time I got in the ring or a cage and I fought. So yeah.
Absolutely. And if it's any consolation to you, I'll tell you that the two most frequent degrees we see in the submarine force are electrical engineering and mechanical engineering. So you were a marked man from your freshman year.
Yep, came very close. I knew my parents wouldn't like me joining the Navy considering they're Army types. And like I said, Doug, living on a submarine, like under ice, sheets of ice for like 9 months a year. I know I would have saw the world, but I was like, nah, I'm good.
I have a confession to make, is that I spent 20 years in the submarine force and hardly ever got Liberty ports. There were Liberty ports, but there were not a lot of them. And then when our daughter joined the Navy and she started her first tour on a destroyer surface ship out of Rota, Spain, in that first 6 months that she was on that ship, she made more port calls around the Mediterranean than I had made on submarines my entire career.
Got you, got you. But if she was in during the time I'm thinking she was in, that was still we were still hot and heavy in the Middle East, though, right? So
Oh
it
yeah,
was
oh yeah.
technically a war zone. Yeah.
Yeah, both her and her spouse were active duty from 2016 to, excuse me, 2014 to she left in 2019. He is still on active duty, and you appreciate what a combat action ribbon means, and he's wearing one for stuff that is history. But on the other hand, all that training kicked in when it should, and he had to act fast, and they managed to make it work.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed working with military dudes. Like they always show up prepared. They always show up more than capable. If you tell them to do five, they'll give you 10 without even asking it. I've always preferred working with military guys. Like, I've always preferred working with former athletes. If I ever work with an engineer and they're former military, former athletes, we always get along. It's just
Absolutely,
certain
absolutely.
mindset that I think the military kind of breeds you guys to be teammates, and there's a certain mindset that you kind of have to have in order to survive in the military. And I find that that works very well in corporate America. It's just been my experience just being in corporate. So yeah, what do you tell guys, Doug, who get to like they're year 17 in the military and they're scared to retire? They're like, okay, I've been in the military, I'm institutionalized. All I know is the U.S. Army. All I know is the Marines. What do you tell guys that like seven or women that are like 17, 18 years in the force and they have basically they're scared to get out? What advice do you give them? Because I run across a lot of my buddies that are in that situation right now.
Well, I'll use my own family as an example. I went to 20 on active duty because of fear and ignorance and chronic fatigue, new parent. But that fear and ignorance was because I never made the time to learn about other options other than full throttle active duty 24/7, 365. I was aware that there was a reserve branch of the Navy, but I really didn't know anything about it. And I didn't take the time or make the time to figure out anything about it. So that went along, and out of fear and ignorance, I got close enough to retirement that when I got to a place where I could see the goal line and life did not suck too badly, well, I went and did the extra 2.5 years to get to the pension. And yet, my spouse, having watched me do that, got to the same inflection point in her career where she got that unrefusable offer, and life was about to get much more miserable before it got better. And as we went through it all, and this time we had math skills, we had the 4% safe withdrawal rate, we had just reached financial independence. We looked at all of that and realized it's only money. I had overshot the line to financial independence by staying on active duty by, in retrospect, probably $1 million in today's dollars over compounding, right? The extra money we went into retirement with, that compounded to far more wealth than we need. And we did the same math with her and realized that was the same situation. So she went into the reserves. And again, personal experience, but our life immediately became much less stressful, a much higher quality of life, and much less drama and craziness on the sidelines from whatever is going on active duty. So I tell people today, if you're in the military, stay on active duty as long as you're feeling challenged and fulfilled. Sometimes that's even fun, but I'm talking more about challenge and fulfillment. You're getting the mission done. You feel like you're helping something. When that stops, it doesn't matter where you are in your career. Don't gut it out to 20. Whether you've got just 2 years in, finish out your obligation. If you've got 18 years in, finish out your obligation. But when you get to that obligation point where it's a chance to sign up again or to re-obligate or do a new tour, if you're not having fun, if you're no longer feeling challenged and fulfilled, then leave active duty for the reserves and guards. And I'm the person that is here to help you do that. I can explain all the differences between reserve and guard, excuse me, between active duty and reserve and guard. I can explain all the differences in compensation, the lifestyle, the routine. Got a couple other friends who are also military bloggers. They can explain the same concepts. And as you pointed out, that initiative, that motivation, that skill set, that soft skills that you get from being a military veteran, if you decide to go work a part-time job in the civilian world, you will be absolutely able to balance your career in the military, in the reserves or guard, with your civilian career. Financial independence will probably happen at about the same time. And if you've got skills and you apply those to a civilian career, I would say financial independence might even happen faster. So in my case, in the 1990s, when I was at that inflection point, I might have been one of those guys who went onto the internet and figured out webs and websites and blogs and online marketing, and I would have probably reached financial independence about the same time either way. But again, today, life is very good, and we have more money than we need because we were saving for financial independence and got to that point where I had to make a retention decision, and it was not challenging and fulfilling anymore.
Got you. I love that. I love that. If you had joined the reserves, you feel that you probably would have made a little bit less money to have a better quality of life. That's what it seems like.
You don't gut it out to 20 because in the reserves, you can work typically the marketing campaign is 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. And that's the bare minimum. And you might have opportunities to do more and you might want to do more, but you also will get to a grand total of 20 years. Some of it will be active duty, some of it will be time in reserves. And when you get to that 20-year mark as a reservist or as a Guard member, then you still get a military pension. And for most reserve and Guard members, that pension starts at age 60. For a few, it can start a little earlier, depending on how many orders you've done and where you've gone and what you've been through. But the whole point is that if you're in your 40s, late 40s, even early 50s, and you have that pension waiting for you at age 60, then the amount of investments that you've built up over the years has to last until you start that pension at age 60. And then after that, you're eligible for Social Security. And that completely changes the financial game, realizing that you can leave active duty where your family's moving too much, your kids are not always happy with the new school, you feel a lot of stress, there's a lot of separation and deprivation, versus being in a reserve or Guard, which has much less of the sucky stuff and much more of the things you like about the military.
Absolutely, absolutely. I like how you continue to go back to that, Doug. A lot of financial guru types that I talk to, a lot of wealth builders or financial influencers, it's all about money, 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 money. You're talking about lifestyle, and you can't put a premium on that. I mean, seriously, the work-life balance that you have, Doug, a lot of people will literally kill to have that. And I like how it's not money with you, it's wealth. And wealth is you spending time with your granddaughter, you spending time with your wife, you traveling to other countries. And to all my listeners, that to me is why you make a lot of money. It's not so you can drive a bigger, faster car, so you can live in a bigger house. It's so that you can live the kind of life that you want to live. And Doug, it seems like you're doing that too, if I were to guess. So yeah.
Yeah, I've got 2 decades of practice at it, and you're seeing the success at the other end of the rainbow. And initially, when we reached financial independence and I retired, there was still 6 months of recovering from burnout. And there was still that time of exploration and figuring out what you want to do with your day. But you have the time and you have the energy and you already have the financial resiliency to figure all that stuff out. And it's impossible to do that, I think, largely impossible to do that while you're working a 40 or 50-hour employment week. I mean, we talk about in the military, we talk about combat and the fog of war. I don't know if you've heard that phrase before.
Absolutely.
And when you're trying to reach financial independence, I have a blog post about the fog of work, where once you're working, it's hard to take all that time out of your life to think about financial independence, retiring, your new lifestyle. Those are all challenges. But if you've had a successful career as an employee or as an entrepreneur or even as a corporate executive, I think it's a much bigger challenge to figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life, whether that's retiring early or working because you're challenged and fulfilled, or simply taking on more volunteer jobs or paying it forward some other way.
I say it's a good problem to have. If you go from working 60 hours a week, being a high six-figure professional or a corporate executive, and then retiring at 45, and you say, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Those are good problems, and you can afford to do it. Those are good problems to have, everybody. That's what you want. You don't want to be no disrespect to people who are doing this, but you don't want to be 68 years old pushing a broom at McDonald's or being a greeter at Walmart. I mean, if that's what you want to do, cool. But in my opinion, the way you're doing it, Doug, you got the beautiful Hawaiian sunset in the background. You get to spend time with your family. You can travel to a different country every month if you want to. That's people, to me, that's living. That's retirement right there. So yeah. One thing I said that was pretty cool, Doug, was when I was sitting in that bar in Atlanta, basically waiting for FinCon to start. I saw about 20 people walk up to you asking you about your book. And obviously you were a very accomplished writer. So brag about yourself a little bit. How did you get into writing, and tell everybody about something about your book that you've written that you're very proud about?
Well, I joke that I managed to disguise this writing skill of mine for 20 years of active duty from all my executive officers who wanted me to write stuff. And when I started my retirement, I was still posting to forums on the internet, and I was asking about financial independence and the financial side and all the personal finance that goes into it. And I started writing more and more and more. While I was doing that on internet forums, there's another guy on a forum. His name is Bob Clyott, and Bob was writing a book on that forum. He had decided he was going to write a book about financial independence. It's called Work Less, Live More. It was published in 2005. And he was getting pushback from his publisher over the manuscript. And so he was asking members of this forum questions about what he'd written and how well this would work. And the more he talked about the book and the more he showed samples of the writing, the more us military veterans on this forum realized that Bob was writing about solving the biggest challenges for retirees, inflation and healthcare. And yet if you're a military family and you leave active duty, you probably have enough money saved up, or you've been getting pay, or you've retired and got a pension that's adjusted for inflation. And you've had cheap healthcare while you're on active duty, and cheap healthcare is still available in the military when you're a veteran, even as a retiree. All those problems are solved. And we started talking about those issues, and that eventually led to somebody saying we should write a book. And I was a lot more naive then than I am today. And I said, sure, I can do that. But we crowdsourced it. And again, I got volunteers because they got to have a vote on what charity we gave the revenue, the royalties to. And I still do that. All the royalties that the military guide makes, all the money from the blog and public speaking that I do, all that goes to military friendly charities. And then after that was published, 7, 8 years go by, I start getting questions at financial meetups, and people say, I understand the 4% safe withdrawal rate. I don't need to hear more about that. What I need to know is how to get my kids on board. And I fumbled around with that for a couple of years of meetups and interviews and questions. And I finally, one night, my spouse and I were visiting our daughter and son-in-law in their apartment, and we're sitting around the dinner table. And I said, hey, Carol, I got that question again about raising kids for financial independence. What worked for you? What was it like when you were growing up and we came up with these brilliant parenting ideas that you were going to have to do with your money? And boy, she had thoughts, right? I mean, there's therapy going, I don't know, maybe it was pent up. She had a lot of good thoughts. She knew what worked and what did not work. And I'm just watching her in fascination, hearing these words come out of her mouth, and finding out really this is the adult looking back on her childhood raising and telling you right there what's going to work and what's not. And I look over at my wife to see if she's doing that, and she's making that motion at me. It says, you better be writing this down. And actually, the next day, our daughter was going through the transition seminar to leave active duty at that point. She was getting ready to get out. And so she was sitting in the back of the room with her laptop, writing the first 3 chapters of what became our book on raising your money savvy family for next generation financial independence. And I joke that I co-wrote that book, but mainly I was scrambling to keep up with her. She was probably about into chapter 6 before I even got into chapter 4. The point of the book, we researched this. This isn't just somebody telling you how to raise your kids. This is the kid who is now an adult telling you what worked and what did not. And so, well, the publisher, the editor hated us because these books are hard to write with this kind of back and forth storytelling, but the editor made us do it right. And God, I hope she got paid for it. The point is that I set up the story with some brilliant idea that we parents came up with. And then my daughter's part of that chapter talks about how she felt about it when it was imposed on her, when we suggested it to her, when we dangled those incentives in front of her, versus how she feels as an adult, especially now that she's raising a daughter of her own who's also ready to start doing those same financial independence moves of managing your money and making choices and financial incentives. And so that alone lets parents think about what they're going to do and how their kids are going to receive it. And if you're an authoritarian parent who says this is the way you're going to do it, that kid is probably going to struggle, push back, and maybe not internalize all those techniques you're teaching them. If you're an authoritative parent who has the experience and you've built the wealth and they can see that you're reaching financial independence, well, those kids are going to look at that parent and say, wow, they've got a great lifestyle. They're doing it right. I would like to reach financial independence someday myself. And frankly, if you're a kid, the next thing that comes through your mind is, if my lame parents could get to financial independence, how hard could it be? Which there's some of that going on with our teenage daughter, all in a very good way, all of which gets them launched out of the nest and on a trajectory of their own. And as a parent, you just want your kids to be happy someday, even if they're, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or even if they just get out of the military after one service obligation. You just want them to be happy with what they've done.
Absolutely, Doug. I love it. As a very young father, like I said, I have a 2-year-old and I have an 8-month-old. I'm always kind of curious how I'm going to start teaching them about money and about how to build wealth. And what you just said in describing, my kids are going to be learning a lot of that as well. So thank you for the education on that. As a very young father to a grandfather, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Paying it forward.
I want to be respectful of your time, so I have a few more questions if you're cool with that.
Yeah.
Let's say you had a long lost uncle that you never knew, and he left you and your wife $1 million, Doug. What would you do with that money, I guess?
We get that question a lot. And the first thing I do is park it somewhere to think about. And by parking it somewhere, I mean, I put it in a high yield savings account. Actually, that much money 5 high yield savings accounts, right, to get below the FDIC insurance limits.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I'd park it somewhere, and then we'd start the discussion. What do we want to do with this? When money falls out of the sky and lands on your head, you need to take the time to think about it and analyze it. At my point in my life, the option exists for us to give all of that money to charity. And that would be a very interesting discussion. I can't tell you which way I'd fall on it. Another option would be, this is money that we never needed. What should we do with money that you don't need? What kind of risk do you imagine we could take? I mean, I could put that all into NVIDIA. I could put it all into Bitcoin. I could put it all into an angel investment. And those, again, are good discussions. I think with what I've learned about angel investing and what I've seen with NVIDIA and Bitcoin, I would say that those are insanely risky, and I don't want to have to live with that kind of drama and volatility in my life anymore. The third option is to park it into, I don't know, a passively managed index fund with low expense ratios like the other money we have. Just continue that asset allocation. You take that windfall and you put it into your asset allocation and you leave it there. Here's a story. When my father passed away from Alzheimer's in late 2017, my brother and I each inherited $600,000. And we did exactly that. The $600,000 went parked into a money market account. And eventually I finished settling the estate and everything else was all wrapped up. My spouse and I had a discussion and said, we don't know. And we put it into the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Exchange Traded Fund. We just put it in the VTI. And it sat there. This was 2018, and it sat there until early 2020 when the pandemic began. Now, we have a home here on Oahu and we have a rental property, but we've always been discussing how good it would be to bring our daughter and son-in-law back onto Oahu, especially after they became parents, and now we can have the family back on the island. And we had all these plans of putting them in our rental property or putting them in our house, and we'd go in a rental property. We had all this figured out. So we'd already had these discussions, and then a house went on sale right up the street from us. And when I say a house goes on sale in the street, what I mean is usually it's probate. But every 2 or 3 years, a house goes on sale on the street. And in this case, the owners were moving to another island. So we had plenty of time to talk with them. And turns out they were new grandparents as well. And they completely understood what we were trying to do. We were in a position to buy that house with an all cash offer because I had that money from my father. Now, the backstory behind that is that while my daughter and our son-in-law were on active duty, we were always traveling to their duty station. And they were moving every 2 or 3 years. And we always were fantasizing how wonderful it would be for them to come back to Hawaii and be stationed here. We could have them nearby. We could get together more often instead of just online. And of course, once they started their family, we realized this would be great to be in our granddaughter's life every day, not just visiting for a couple times a year and dropping a bunch of presents and sugar and then turning her back over to her parents. Not that you're dealing with anything like that in your family right now.
Not at all.
So we had figured it out. We own our house here and we have a rental property here on Oahu. And we had talked about before how one of us would move into the rental property and the other one of us would take over the home here. So we had already discussed a lot of this stuff before that house went on the market right up the street. And on our street, it's unusual. Frequently it's probate, but when a house goes on the market here, you move fast. And this was in May of the pandemic, which was just the beginning of all the crazy real estate stuff as people realized they wanted to have a home in a backyard. So we looked at that house and we talked it over with our daughter and son-in-law and wondered if this would work for them and if this would be a good plan and all those discussions you have. But we'd had many of these discussions already over the years. And that $600,000 gave us the financial resiliency to put in an all cash offer for that house, which we did. And we had to cash in more of our investments to do that. But this is what financial independence is for, is the ability to make these outrageous, potentially unthinkable decisions and choices with your money and still remain financially independent. And we did that. We ended up buying the place with all cash because that's what it took to win the bidding war back then. And when we did, the plan initially in 2020 was that they'd be moving in there in 2021 as soon as he finished his graduate degree program on the mainland. Of course, the Navy intervened and had other plans, and they ended up, we ended up running that as a house project, a home improvement project for almost 4 years. But earlier this year, they finally moved back to the island full time. I mean, they visited many times over those 4 years, but they finally moved back to the island full time and got settled in, and life is good. We still have that rental property. We're still talking about what to do about that, but we are getting everything organized and everything's working fine. That $600,000 gave us opportunities we had never thought of before. It also gave me a chance to do the biggest wire transfer ever in my life from Fidelity to a title company. And you know, if you do one of those wire transfers in that level of money, you don't need to do more of them. I will say that another lesson I learned was when I called Fidelity to start cashing out the investments. I cashed out my father's inheritance account and I cashed out some stuff from our taxable account. And the Fidelity representative, I was talking to him because I knew I needed to transfer that over into an account and get ready for the wire transfer. I just had questions about the mechanics. As he was doing that, he said, "Wow, you have a lot of capital gains here. Are you sure you want to do this?" And my answer was, "Isn't that how it's supposed to work? Isn't it supposed to be this way where you invest for 2 decades and then in that third decade, the compounding kicks in and suddenly you have more money than you need for your financial independence? Isn't that the way this is supposed to be?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "I don't see it very often."
That's the literally, it's interesting because one reason why, full disclosure, I started Financipation because I got sick and tired of seeing people, family members, friends, work hard their entire life
Right.
and retire at 60 with nothing.
Right.
And it wasn't because these people were stupid. It was not because they were lazy. And it wasn't even because they didn't go to school. They just didn't know how to make money work in the capitalistic country that we live in. And it's so refreshing, Doug, to run across a guy like yourself who, by hook or by crook, you figured out how to make money work for you and your family in capitalism. And that's amazing. You bought a house in Oahu, Hawaii, one of the greatest places in the world to live, from what I've heard, and your grandkids can live right next door to you. People, that's wealth. That's the reason why I started Financipation, because I got sick and tired of not seeing that happen. I mean, literally, you have financially emancipated yourself from poverty, and your great granddaughter and your great grandson, who aren't even born yet, they're going to be the beneficiaries of that because you and your wife understood how to become financially free. Exactly. That's what Rockefeller did. That's what Carnegie did. And people, that's why we have got to learn how money works, because I'm sick and tired of seeing people work hard their entire life at Chrysler or the U.S. military or as an engineer or as a person who works basically a blue collar job, and then they retire broken down with no money. And Doug, this has been such a thank you. I've honestly thoroughly enjoyed this podcast. This has been a true
All
treat.
right.
I truly have. My last question for you is this: your time on Earth is past. What do you want your legacy to be? I would say.
The legacy is going to be everything I've written on the internet. All those books, all those blog posts, all those forum discussions, that's going to be the legacy. The other legacy is going to be that our daughter and son-in-law continue paying it forward like we've paid it forward to them and all of our audience. And they're going to do the same for our granddaughter. We'll just see how far this goes. You've heard that saying that shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, how family wealth never survives beyond a third generation.
Yeah.
Ironically, that saying shows up in just about every language in the world: Africa, Asia, Europe, America, South America. It shows up everywhere. So there might be a force of nature we have to deal with there, but we have the financial literacy tools in hand. They're all over the internet and they're more widespread than they ever have been before. So maybe we can make this go 4, 5, 6 generations.
Absolutely, absolutely. As a son, as a husband, as an entrepreneur, as a grandfather, as an author, Doug, thank you for this. I've learned so much in this podcast, just as far as just not just the whole financial things, whatever, but this is quintessentially where I want to be in my life 25 years from now, as far as my grandkids and my family, my in-laws, everybody like that, because people, this is financial independence. This is literally what it looks like, everybody. When I first was in that bar and I was watching everybody come up to this guy, I was like, I need to find out who this gentleman is, because seriously, Doug, people follow people who don't just talk it, they live it. And apparently you had lived it to the point where these people wanted to find out, they wanted to know more about you, which is what drew me to you. So thank you for this, Doug. I appreciate it. Your handles and everything, where can my listeners find you at?
I'm online as the Military Guide, or online on Facebook under my name, actual name. And anybody's welcome to contact me. My Facebook profile is totally public. Send me a message. I'll also put out my email address here. It's already all over the internet and all over the dark web too. Nords at gmail.com. And the blog is militaryfinancialindependence.com. And if you're a military family, go read that. I also would like to emphasize once again that, yes, we have written books. They are in the library. Go to your military-based library or your local public library. Find the book there, all editions. Try it before you buy it, and that way you'll figure out what works for you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for this, Doug. Thank you for this.
All right,
Everybody,
Chris.
yep, this channel is all about making money. It's all about saving money. It's all about building generational wealth. You can book a one-on-one session with me at any point. The link is going to be below. I'm not giving you financial advice. You must make responsible decisions based on the thorough independent research that you do for yourself. I can be found at www.therealfinancialpatient.com. Check me on Instagram, @thereal_financialpatient, Spotify's Financialpatient, my TikTok is Financialpatient, and check out my Facebook tribe, Financialpatient, as well. And please check out my digital blog, Financialpatient, where I go into a lot more detail. We talked about this, about the 4% rule, the HSAs, index fund investing, how to select the correct stock, all that kind of stuff. And Doug, once again, thank you. I mean, seriously, I like seeing the examples of where I want to be in life, whether it was engineering, whether it was kickboxing, whether it was mixed martial arts, whether it was index fund investing, whether it was retirement. And I'm seeing kind of where I want my wife and I to be in 30 or 40 years. Well, 20, actually 10 or 15 years, actually, to be honest with you. So thank you for this, Doug. This was powerful and I truly appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
All right, Chris. Thanks.
Yep.
Talk to you later.
Have a good one. Take care. Take care.